Um, we will move on. So a little bit more about our family. Pastor mentioned my dad is a pastor. I grew up in a family. I have 6 brothers and no sisters, so we are a home of 7 boys. No sisters in the house. My mom was the only woman, and sometimes we just thought she was one of the guys. She's a very godly mother, and very good with boys, as you can imagine. My youngest brother just got married a few weeks ago. So we have 7 brides for 7 brothers now. And that's been a family joke for a very long time, and we can actually say it now. Okay.
It looks like it's not.
Okay, that's okay. That's all right. So I grew up in ministry. My dad's been a pastor now for almost 40 years. And, my brothers and I all grew up in ministry. I have heard the gospel since I was basically born. And I remember very early on as a child thinking that I'm saved because my parents are in the ministry. My dad's a pastor, and that's actually where I get my salvation. I really thought that as a 4 and a 5-year-old. But then the Lord used something in a message that my dad preached to convict me that, no, actually, salvation is something that I need for myself. I don't inherit this from anybody. It's a relationship that I need with Christ. But I was scared. I didn't want to tell anybody that I wasn't saved. I was afraid that would make my dad look bad. But at age 6, the Lord finally brought me to a point after a message, again, that my dad preached, a communion message. I came to a point where I could not sleep that night. And so I got my dad, and he very gently, through Scripture, led me to the Lord that night. But I still really struggled with this pride in my identity more as a pastor's kid than as a child of God. And as a young kid, my whole mindset was I need to be the most well-behaved kid in the church. I need to look a certain way. I need to talk a certain way. I have to perform a certain way just because my dad is in the ministry. And I began to develop a lot of pride as a middle schooler. And really that pride led me to plan out my life completely outside of the Lord's will. I never asked the Lord what He wanted me to do. I never submitted my life to Him as a child, even as a pastor's kid, because my assumption was that I could do whatever I wanted to do with my life, and it would look good, because I was a good pastor's kid. I could be completely outside of the Lord's will, but the people that I really cared about would see me and say, he's doing the Lord's will because he can't help it because he's a pastor's kid. So when I was 15 years old, my best friend and I, his name is Adam, he and I became Native American blood brothers. We used my pocket knife. We did the ritual on my parents' front porch. There are no kids in the room, so I share a little bit more detail. But we cut ourselves, we put our thumbs together, and we made 2 promises together. Number 1, we promised that we would never, ever, ever get married. And secondly, we promised that as soon as we turned 16, we were going to sign into the United States Air Force with the goal of being in pararescue, Air Force Special Forces. Our goal, our passion, all that we really cared about was either flying or jumping out of perfectly good airplanes to rescue people. For the rest of our lives, hanging out together in the military. A few months before I turned 16, and had planned to email our local Air Force recruiter, the Lord brought a missionary family to my dad's church on a Wednesday. And for the first time in my life, I heard about missionary aviation. And I remember thinking that this is what I want to do when I retire from the Air Force. I want to take all my aviation training, and I want to go to a mission field, and that'll look even better than being in the military for a pastor's kid. But before the night was over, before their presentation was over, really the best way I can explain it is the Lord reached down and took out my desire and He replaced it with His. Before I even left the church building that night, I had no desire to join the Air Force, and I knew that the Lord was calling me into ministry as in aviation. And around that time, I realized that, okay, I just broke one of my promises with Adam in deciding to be a missionary. And I realized that I was about to break my other promise with Adam. I was starting to recognize the only eligible girl in my dad's church, Rachel Lasher. We started the looking phase where we start looking at each other, making eye contact. Then we began dating. She's 2 years older than I am. She went to Bob Jones and graduated before I ever started college. But in between her, after she graduated and when I started college, we started dating. She knew right away that I knew the Lord was calling me into ministry, into some remote mission field with aviation. So I started college, and it was my freshman year where I heard about this ministry in Alaska and became interested in it. I reached out to Mike Clark. This was after we were married. We were married my sophomore year. Basically, I ran out of money in college. I didn't want to go into debt, so I decided to get married, which may have not been a good idea, but thankfully the Lord just worked everything out, and both our parents advised us to do this, so we believe we were in the Lord's will. But then I just finished college slowly as a married town student with a full-time job. But we were very interested in this ministry in Alaska. It's what we wanted to do, this style of ministry, reaching remote places using aviation. So we visited this ministry. You heard about this in the video. For about 6 weeks. We flew there. Our oldest daughter, Anna, was 9 months old at the time. And we spent 6 weeks in this village. And we saw the vision. We saw what the Clarks have been wanting to do now for almost 20 years, and it has yet to happen. And so after those 6 weeks, we knew the Lord was calling us back. And you'll see our family here in the picture now. This picture was taken last summer. We revisited the ministry. This is our mission aircraft, the Piper Cherokee 6. This is what Mike Clark has flown for 15 years. With his family, they've raised 5 children in this village. They're now empty nesters. But you'll see our picture there. Anna, again, in the purple dress, she's our oldest. She's 6 years old. James, scratching his fleas, is 4 years old. And Malia is 2. James does not have fleas. I just wanted to clear that up. I start with this picture in our PowerPoint for several reasons. If you grab our prayer card, that's our family picture. It's over 2 years old, and you know how quickly kids change. So this is an updated picture of our family. But also, we begin with this picture because this is where our ministry begins as Christian parents. The Lord has called us to this ministry, but He called us to be Christian parents. And we believe, my wife and I, believe that our children are our primary ministry. They are with us right now more than any other human being. We, for now, are their greatest spiritual influence. We, Lord willing, have family worship with them every evening. We teach them diligently the things of God. Scripture calls children gifts to their parents. And so before we get too far in our presentation for any kind of ministry, our children, they are our primary ministry. So that's another reason why we begin that way. Okay, a little bit about geography. And I only share this because I struggled with this. Some of you may remember with me back in middle school where we start to learn our country's geography, and the textbooks have the impossible job of fitting all 50 states accurately on one page. So you can picture in your mind, some of you, where Alaska is normally placed. Okay, it's somewhere on the lower left-hand corner between Texas and Hawaii. So this map, this is a screenshot of my computer of Google Maps. Just to clear that confusion up, Alaska is actually farther north than most of Canada. This isn't a super accurate picture. Google Maps does not account for the curvature of the earth, so some of the size proportions are a little off. But the other things those textbooks do, and they can't help it, but they have to shrink Alaska big time. And it's about the size of California maybe in these pictures. But if you just look at this map, Alaska is our country's largest state. You may have heard this, and it's true. If you cut Alaska in half, both halves are still larger than the state of Texas. Alaska has approximately 665,000 square miles in their landmass. It has over 3 million lakes, which is over double the other 49 states has combined. Alaska has more tidal shoreline than the other 49 states combined. And you'll see in this picture, Anchorage, it's the state's largest city. And in the middle of the state is Fairbanks. Between Anchorage and Fairbanks, that's where a little over 50% of Alaska's population live. You'll see Juneau there on the lower right-hand corner, our state capital. South of Juneau is Ketchikan. Ketchikan, and there's a small town just south of Ketchikan. Those are the easternmost towns of Alaska. And if you take Alaska's distance, that panhandle that touches into Canada on the southeast, that distance from east to the farthest west coast, Aleutian Island, that spans approximately 2,500 miles. And to put that in perspective, east coast to west coast, mainland United States, is 2,800 miles. Alaska is a few hundred miles short of reaching east coast to west coast United States. It's by far our country's largest state. The population is a little surprising. A little over 732,000 people in our country's largest state. And if my math is correct, I'm assuming it is because it was on a calculator on my phone, you can fit Alaska's population inside the population of New York City 11 and a half times. 81% of Alaska's population live where we call the road system. You can literally get to their house from here in a vehicle. They live either in Anchorage or Fairbanks, in between the Kenai Peninsula, south of Anchorage, north of Anchorage. The road goes up to Prudhoe Bay. It's the northernmost reach of the road. Somewhere between Prudhoe Bay and Homer, that's where 81% of Alaska's population live. The problem is the road only reaches about 10% of the landmass of Alaska. That means that 19% of Alaska's population live in about 90% of the landmass, the vast wilderness of Alaska. And most of these people live in small communities spread all over the state of Alaska. Much of Alaska is uninhabited. Over 50% of the landmass of Alaska is called untouched wilderness. No one has ever gone there before. But this 19% of the population live where we are going. Hard to reach places, the only way there is by airplane. And you'll see southwest of Anchorage the word Iliamna. That's the village we are going to. Just south of Iliamna is our country's largest freshwater lake, other than the Great Lakes. Lake Iliamna. It's home to the world's largest sockeye salmon migration. Iliamna is right next to the lake. The village is right on the lake. This is a community of about 300 people. Most of them are Yupik natives. Alaska has 5 major tribes. You are familiar with Eskimo. Eskimo is a coastal tribe. Yupik is the southwestern tribe. Those are 2 of those 5 major tribal groups. And then there are a lot of sub-tribes as well. But in this southwestern region, you'll see also Leevlock, Nustoyahawk. Those are other villages in our area, Yupik native communities. These are very remote. Anchorage is the nearest, you name it. Iliamna, these other villages, we don't have grocery stores. We don't have mechanics. We don't have mechanic stores. We don't have hospitals, colleges, anything like that. So for us to get any of that, we have to fly through the mountain pass, 250 miles. It takes about an hour and 45 minutes with good weather. We fly our Piper Cherokee through the mountains to get to Anchorage where we do our grocery shopping. And that usually happens about every 3 to 4 months, where we will fly into Anchorage, go to Costco, and get 3 to 4 months worth of groceries. And then we pay over $1 per pound for all of our groceries to be put on the air taxi, which then flies it back to our village and delivers it to the airport, and then we pick it up with our vehicle and drive it to our house. That's how these people get their groceries. That's how they get their mail. Like I said, this is a taxi service, so they provide shuttle service to and from the city, from these villages. They deliver the mail to all these villages. They deliver anything that they can fit on a large turboprop aircraft. That's how the villages get all of their stuff. This is Iliamna. That red roof there is the church building, Iliamna Baptist Chapel. Baptist Mid Missions owns this property. They own the building. They own the parsonage where the Clarks live. And this is how most of these Yupik Native villages are laid out. They are very spread out. And the Yupik tribe especially lives like this. And I share this with you because this is a window into their culture. When we land there as outsiders in a small bush plane and we get out at the air taxi, we are not welcomed with open arms from the natives who are so glad to see outsiders. They are very closed relationally to outside people. They really are not interested in outsiders for the most part, unless they bring business or money or gifts. But there is not this assumed relationship with these people. And it's even more so in some harder to reach villages than Iliamna. And what the Clarks have found is that it has taken them almost 5 years. The first 5 years of their ministry was used to just build relationships. And it was 5 years before they were really able to share the gospel with a native person. The native people don't want to listen to what outsiders have to say. So a lot of these villages are laid up like this. They're extremely close to one another. They're very close relationally to other tribes, even other native people, but not so much with outsiders. Each village is located on a water system because they rely on fish mostly to survive in this area. That's their source of meat. They live a subsistence lifestyle. So right now, this is the beginning. The beginning of July is sockeye salmon season. The salmon are running. They are coming from Bristol Bay up the Kvichak River to Lake Iliamna. And the native culture revolves this time of year around the salmon season. If the salmon are running, they're fishing, and it really doesn't matter what time of day because they catch as many salmon as they need to survive the rest of the year. And in the end of September and October, it's moose season, and the men go moose hunting, and that's their meat. That's their culture. And what the Clarks have found is learning to fish like the native people has been one of the greatest tools to build these relationships with them. They have learned from the natives how to fish. They fish with the natives. Mike goes on moose hunts with the native men. And that has been one of the greatest tools the Lord has used to build these relationships with the native people, is doing this part of their culture. When Mike's net is torn open by a hungry grizzly bear, he takes his net to a native man who can mend that net. And that is a relationship building opportunity. Just because they hunt and they fish like the native people. Hunting and fishing is not a sport in this area. It's their culture. It's their way of life. And obviously we are planning to adapt to this part of their culture as well. Another huge way the Lord has used for the Clarks to build relationships is through skills, trades. Native people, Alaskan natives, do not know trades. They don't know electrical, they don't know plumbing, they don't know construction, they don't know medical, they don't know computer stuff. But at the same time, it's a weird combination. They also live in a somewhat modern home where they have modern construction, they have appliances, they have electrical. So when they have a project that needs done, they don't know how to do it. So they either try to do it themselves or they hire someone from Anchorage and pay a lot of money for that person to fly in and help. Or they know that the missionary, Mike Clark, knows construction. He had his own construction business when he was in college. And the Lord has used his skill in construction to build relationships with these native people. This was a yurt that we helped build our first trip there. And just because Mike knows construction, he was invited to come and help build. And I got to watch him start relationships with native men that he would not have been able to otherwise. His wife, Jeanette, is a registered nurse, and she's been used in the health clinic in the village and just as a first responder in the village in many ways to build relationships with these people. And the Lord has uniquely prepared my wife and I for this ministry. You heard in the video that my wife went to Bob Jones to teach music, and that was her degree. She teaches violin, piano, and cello. And we actually found out while we were in this village that the kids love music, but there are no music teachers in any of these villages. So we saw a huge potential in music lessons for the kids and reaching their families through music. While I was in college, I had several full-time jobs. One of them, I was an appliance technician for 3.5 years. I learned the trade. They have appliances. The problem is when a $150 refrigerator part goes bad and their refrigerator stops cooling, they can't call a repairman to come and fix it. So what they do is they take that appliance, they put it on the back of a four-wheeler, and they drive it outside the village and they throw it on a big pile of appliances. And then they have to wait for a 3.5-month window of time in the summer where a barge boat can bring in supplies that don't fit on the air taxi, and that's when they get their new appliance. So I'm hoping to open up a small repair ministry where I can service appliances for these people and even teach some of them how to fix their own appliances and using that to build relationships with the native people. And then this is our ministry strategy in kind of a big picture. Our mission board has had a presence in this ministry for almost 50 years. They have had missionaries stationed in Iliamna. And for 50 years, the goal has been not just Iliamna, but the almost dozen villages within a 100-mile radius of Iliamna that have not been reached with the gospel. But the only way to effectively do that is for multiple missionaries to be stationed in Iliamna, alternating with each other, going out and living in another village, and then returning home, and then the other family goes out. That way there's somebody still in Iliamna doing the work of the ministry there. This picture is another one of these villages. This is Levelock. You heard Levelock in the video. When we were there, Levelock had about 75 Yupik people. It's even more remote than Iliamna. You may be able to see a large building right in the middle of the picture. And just to the right of that building is a square lump of trees. Baptist Mid-Missions owns 1/4 of an acre in that square lump of trees, where they used to have missionaries live there. We flew to Levelock our last Sunday there for a Sunday morning service. And I took this picture. This is the parsonage. It has not been lived in quite some time. But this ministry has been vacant for a very long time. And what the Clarks have been able to do is they visit Levelock usually about one day out of the year, where they will fly to Levelock on a Sunday morning, or they'll fly to another village on a Sunday morning. They'll have a single Sunday service. And any of the natives in the village who can come. They preach, they work with the people, they disciple who they can, and then they have to return to Iliamna for their full-time ministry there. So our last Sunday there, as I said, we went there, and Mike radioed ahead to one of the native believers, a lady who is in Levelock. He said, "We're coming with an intern and his family. Meet us at the church. We'll have a Sunday morning service." And I took this picture as well. This is the auditorium. Mike, on our flight there, took us about 45 minutes to get there in the plane. He explained to me the ministry goal for all of these villages, especially Levelock. And he said, we used to have missionaries living in Levelock, but it's been a long time. There has not been a missionary family in Levelock since 1994. the year I was born. And I preached in this auditorium to Mike the missionary and 3 Yupik native ladies. It's one of the most awkward sermons I've ever preached, but I really enjoyed it. And afterwards, Mike introduced me to Patricia, who was the oldest Yupik native believer of the 3 in the village. And she shook my hand, and she looked at me and she said, "Are you the preacher I've been praying for 20 years?" She was saved under the ministry of the previous missionary family, but this ministry has been vacant now for almost 30 years. And I knew at that point the Lord was starting to do something. I wasn't sure at that point if we were supposed to return to this ministry, but the Lord used that experience to confirm in my mind, in my heart, that this is where God wanted us. And so we returned to Iliamna, and the Clarks said that I shared with the Clarks that the few hours in Levelock was worth the 6 weeks we had in the village, because I was confident that the Lord wanted us to return. Hearing the remote nature of some of these villages, Mike and I would fly over some of the other villages, and he said, as far as he knows, these villages have never been reached with the gospel before. They are unreached people in many of these village communities. So, as I mentioned, Iliamna will be our base of ministry. Part of the reason for that is because Iliamna is more of a hub just in the Alaskan Southwest. We have 2 air taxi businesses. They deliver food, mail, and people to all these villages. There is a consistent travel system between our village and Anchorage through the air taxi. We have paved runways in our village, which is a luxury in Southwest Alaska. Most of them are gravel. But also, the Lord provided miraculously a few years ago for the first Baptist Mid-Missions hangar in Alaska, in Iliamna. The Clarks were able to raise the money through supporting churches, and work teams from those churches came, and they were able to build a hangar, which is a huge step in this ministry. And we are planning to use the hangar to keep our aircraft, and Lord willing, a second aircraft that we would like to purchase in the future as we go out with our family to these villages. And the goal is to use aviation to get to a village and actually live there for 3 to 4 months at a time. In Levelock, obviously the parsonage is going to need a lot of work for us to live there. But that's one of our big goals, is to rebuild the parsonage, get it livable, and then one of the missionary families can live there for several months while the other family is keeping the ministry going in Iliamna. And then a family will come back, and the second family will go out to another village. And that's our goal. That's the style of ministry that we are hoping to do with the Clarks, teaming directly with them. Last summer, we had a dedication service for the hangar. The Clarks sending church pastor came, some other missionaries came, and we had a song service and a prayer service dedicating the use of this hangar to the Lord's work in Southwest Alaska. And I'll share a quick story. This is Wyatt. He is a Yupik young man. Wyatt is the tallest native person I've ever met in my life. He's 6'4". Wyatt was born, like many of these native children, while he was still in his mother's womb. His mother was a heavy drinker, a lot of alcohol. And he suffered several issues because of that. One of them was in his brain, and one of them affected his growth. That's why he's so tall. Our first year there, I met Wyatt, and I called him a gentle giant. He's the nicest kid. And this is our oldest daughter, Anna. She was 9 months old. He basically held her and would not give her back. He loved her. And his joke was he would take my hat off and hold it up as high as he could reach, and I couldn't jump and reach it. Wyatt was saved during a VBS ministry in Iliamna that the Clarks did. Wyatt's burden for the first time in the Clarks ministry was to reach his own people. That's the goal of a missionary. To go to a mission field, evangelize the people there, and have them turn around and evangelize their own people. They make better missionaries than we ever will. And for the first time, Wyatt was a young man who came to Christ and was so burdened to reach his own people. But because of his health issues, he had to go to Anchorage. And he basically lived in the hospital for a long time. But he would tell the Clarks that when he gets back to Iliamna, he was going to help them and stay there and work in that ministry. A few years ago, Wyatt passed away. And he was not able to do that. And that was one of three things that almost drove the Clarks out of the ministry. The Clarks have been alone for almost 20 years. And when something like this happens to them, it is very, very discouraging for them. And they don't have the fellowship that a missionary team provides. Last year I took this picture. This is our daughter Anna now. She's 6 years old. These are some of the Yupik children. We spent 4 weeks in Alaska. And we spent 2 weeks in Iliamna revisiting the ministry. We didn't want to leave. The day we left, I took this picture on a Sunday evening. We left Monday morning. We got into Anchorage, and a lady from the church in Iliamna emailed my wife and said 2 of these kids accepted Christ as their Savior Monday. And I thought of Wyatt. And the Lord has kept these 2 children. They still come to church consistently, and that is often rare in these young people. We have kept up with the Clarks on how they're doing. They are doing well. They continue to come to the kids' time, to the services. They are growing. And we are praying for them, that the Lord would raise up some of these young Native kids to reach their own people. And I will close with this. We are almost finished with deputation. So our traveling is winding down, Lord willing, but we still have a lot of traveling to do. So please pray, Lord, keep us safe. And we're burdened as parents that our children actually enjoy deputation ministry. It's a lot for them. They spend an unnatural amount of time in their car seats. And I have actually sat in Anna's booster seat on purpose to see how comfortable it is, and they are not comfortable. Part of it was because I was way too big for it, but there are natural parts about deputation that kids just don't enjoy. But we have tailored this as best we can, that our kids would enjoy most of it. So pray that they would enjoy the rest of it. And then we pray every Sunday before we go into church building as a family that the Lord would give us good connections with the church people. Part of that is how we present Alaska to you. I try to make it seem very real. Very practical. And then we've had a prayer goal for almost 3 years that we would be fully supported and in Iliamna this year. We are currently just over 95% supported. And it's been incredible to see the Lord bring that support in. We've had to raise a lot, especially because of the aviation side and the expense of living there. But the Lord's brought it in, and we have a faith-filled expectation that we will be in Iliamna, Lord willing, by the end of September. I'm done talking. We have a few minutes. I would love to answer a few questions, if you have any, that we can clear up anything for you. Yes? Yeah, so the relationship the Clarks have with the parents of Ryder and Wiley are their names. I'm not sure exactly. I haven't talked about that, but usually in this ministry, the parents will send their kids to anything. So any ministry that the church has, the parents send their kids to. The Russian Orthodox Church in the village, if they have anything going on, the parents send their kids there. But the parents will never come to church. It has been very hard for the Clarks to have parents consistently come to church. So the Clarks know them very well. The lady who emailed my wife, she watches these kids, so she knows their parents fairly well. And we aren't sure. We know that there's a good relationship, but other than that, we're not exactly sure what the relationship is like. Yes?
Is there a language barrier?
Just English. Sometimes that's a barrier for me. I struggle with English still sometimes. But thankfully, they all speak English, which is a huge benefit for us. The language we will be learning is aviation. and just their subsistence lifestyle. There are native languages that usually the older people will speak. It's a part of their culture they are very proud of, and it's dying. So we're hoping to learn what we can. There's not a language school that we can go to, but we're hoping to learn as much of the language as we can just from the people. But we won't depend on that for communication. Yes, sir. Yupik? Yeah, that's going to be the tribe that we stay with. It's fairly rare, but every now and then a native from another tribe will move to a Yupik village. But they're so closely related. Sometimes you'll have a Yupik that's part Eskimo or part Athabascan or something. But the vast majority of the people in our area, within a 100-mile radius, they're all Yupik, and that's going to be the tribe that right now we're focusing on. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You mentioned Russian Orthodox. How widespread is that? And what would be the primary challenge of those coming like that?
Yeah, how widespread is Russian Orthodox, and how to overcome that ministry. Russian Orthodox is the #1 religion in the native culture. Before the United States purchased Alaska, that was a mistake, Russia sent their missionaries to every single one of these little villages. And they have reached almost every single one of the almost 200 remote villages in Alaska. So most of the villages will have a Russian Orthodox church. And that is now so much of their culture that they say to be a true Alaska Native is to be Russian Orthodox. They have their cultural animistic spirit worship religion, but they've blended the two. And the hard part for us is that the Russian Orthodox priests have a lot of influence in the village. They are very highly respected. A lot of them are native themselves instead of Russian. But they have so much influence. And you can think of Russian Orthodox a lot like Roman Catholicism. Very, very similar. It used to be the same church. There was a big split 1,000 years ago, but used to be the same church, works-based salvation. They worship Mary. They pray to icons. But the native people have swallowed that religion. And for us to overcome that in a huge way is going to be to build these relationships with them to where they trust us enough to realize that what we have to share with them is true. There is a lot of, obviously the Russian Orthodox religion is dead. There's no life in a false gospel. But the people respect it. They're very superstitious about it. They respect it a lot. But we're there to show them that the gospel that we have is the only gospel. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes? Yeah, there are some Russians still. There's actually a village called Russian Village. That's the name of the village. And in some of the villages closer to Russia, Russia's only 55 miles away from Alaska. And some of the coastal, the western coastal villages will have a lot of Russians in them. There are Russians in Anchorage. But for the most part, not everywhere. They're very spread out. Okay, my time is up. If you have any other questions, we would love to answer those. Again, please sign up on our email list, visit our table, please meet our family. But we're looking forward to the rest of the morning with you folks. Thank you very much for your time.